Well, hi everyone. I'm Andy Asher, editor at BloomerBoomer. Now, it's really timely talking with this particular guest today. That's because I just started studying Marcus Tullius Cicero, who died in 43 BC, a Roman politician and lawyer who, among many achievements, wrote on topics about friendship, about old age. An amazing discovery to find out that way before our time, really amazing people were talking about some of the same things that we address here at BloomerBoomer and the Plus 50 Good Life movement. In fact, one of Cicero's books is entitled, in English, On the Good Life. Just imagine that was 100 years before Christ, and here we are today still talking about the same thing. Now, today's guest has a new book, Redefining Aging. I am not sure where she puts herself in relation to Cicero, but she writes about things like the stereotype threat of aging and how to distinguish between normal aging and early warning signs. That is something when something, isn't right. So she is Dr. Ann Kaiser Stearns, a professor of behavior science at the Community College of Baltimore County, and I think she would be a disciple of Rome's greatest orator and a prose stylist such as Cicero. We'll talk with Ann in just a moment, and just want to let you know that this is part of the Plus 50 Good Life movement, a project of the BloomerBoomer.com publication. We'll be right back with Professor Ann Kaiser Stearns right after this. Well, our guest is Professor Ann Kaiser Stearns, author of Redefining Aging, a Caregiver's Guide to Living Your Best Life. Ann, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be with you.
Well, isn't it amazing that we find out that some of the very thoughts that you talk about were ones that were considered long before our time? That's certainly shows a lot of interest that's been going on about aging, doesn't it?
We'd all like to age successfully as much as possible. And it's a surprise to many people that it's not inevitable that we get Alzheimer's disease or dementia. There are a lot of things we can do to reduce our risk factors for those kinds of diseases that affect our memory.
Yeah, well, that's right, and I know your book is a caregiver's guide to living your best life, and I want to touch upon that a little bit. But just in terms of maybe carrying through on that thought a little bit more, it sounds to me as if if from what Cicero, as an example, is speaking about is a lot of that is in our mind and in the perception of aging.
Yes, Becca Levy at Yale University School of Public Health has done longitudinal research for more than 30 years, studying how we get stereotype ideas in our heads and the impact of them. In fact, she has found that we begin to think about what kinds of an old person we will be around the age of 40. And it matters what kind of role models we have, because as we tend to think of ourselves in a certain way aging, we fulfill that prophecy. People who have negative age stereotypes age more quickly, and they even live 7.5 years shorter lives because they have those negative age stereotypes.
Well, then that not only dramatically affects their lives, but it would also affect how they relate to older people in a population. So that's really unfortunate, isn't it?
Yes, I remember being in my late 20s and living in Baltimore City, where we have row houses and we have neighbors on the left and the right. And my neighbors on the left, he was a judge, and his wife, they were in their 60s, and all they could ever talk about was their aches and pains and, unfortunately, their bodily functions. And I remember saying in my late 20s, I'm not going to be like that. Next door to me on the other side was this couple in their 80s who were always interested in my life and had interesting stories to tell. And I never thought of them as old, but I thought of people who were in their 60s old and not people who were in their 80s, just because of the role models I saw for either side.
You wonder, how is that gonna change? Because it's overall, it's not healthy, is it? Is that gonna change?
Well, it is changing. There is a saying that 60 is the new 50 and 70 is the new 60. We're living longer lives. In fact, there are 800,000 people today who are 85 who are expected to live to be 100 just in the United States alone. So we're living longer, but we're also living better. And I can say for sure that we have a better chance of living longer and better and keeping our memory and our functions alive if we know how to take care of ourselves, if our lifestyle adapts to be a lifestyle that directs us toward long, good quality life.
Yeah. Well, we can revisit that. And I also want to touch upon what you're writing about, which is an interesting combination because you're speaking about the caregiver as far as being a caregiver, then, but also how the caregiver can have a fulfilling life in spite of the stresses that that job takes. How did you decide to meld the two together?
Well, my brother and sister and I were in our 60s taking care of our parents when they were in their 80s. And I experienced that business of thinking about my own aging while taking care of my aging parents. And what I found also when writing this book, I was writing a book for caregivers who have that tremendous stress of taking care of a spouse or a parent or another family member with Alzheimer's or another severe disability. And I found myself being aware of my own concerns about aging. My mother had Alzheimer's, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and I experienced the kind of anxiety that I think caregivers experience. Not only do they want to try to take care of their elderly loved one, but they want to take care of themselves. They don't want to be in the same kind of role of dependency and ill health that they see in their parent or spouse.
You know, I have my best high school friend who I discovered has Alzheimer's, and I've connected a little bit with his wife, and I really sense the stresses and the difficulties in having to be a caregiver under a situation like that. So I guess your book addresses that.
Yes, we have to be careful of what I call John Henry Ism. You know, John Henry was a steel driving man, a railroad worker who hammered at such a pace and with such strength that he won a race against a steam driven drill, and then he fell over dead on the spot. We have to rethink whether we want to praise caregivers who make such sacrifices that they make themselves sick or shorten their own lives because they don't get the help they need with caregiving and they try to do everything themselves. It is crucial that the caregiver continue to get exercise, continue to spend time with friends, continue to do whatever is nourishing to them and supportive to them, whether it's going to religious services or having card playing friends or going to movies and spending time with other family members, because the caregiver can very easily burn out and increase his own or her own risk of dementia just from the long-term extreme stress of being a caregiver if they don't get support from others.
What are you finding as far as caregivers are the majority of loved ones providing that care, or are people?
Yes.
Is that the way it is?
Because of the expense, because we're concerned it's very expensive to hire other people, but it's important to know that you can go to many resources and find out about programs where your loved one might go to a memory care center supported by the Department of Aging several hours a day, several days a week, so that you could have respite as a caregiver. There are other resources available through Alzheimer's.com, available through AARP. I have 21 pages of resources in my new book. There are resources out there to help you get the support you need so that you don't burn out.
Well, I hope you liked the show and learned a thing or two. The full show will be available on YouTube and at BloomerBoomer. The audio version will be available on Apple Podcasts. We have other shows coming up with some really amazing guests, so please like us on Facebook and visit us at bloomerboomer.com. Until next time, so long.